You're all here back with videos. It's been quite a while since I've actually made a video, so I do apologize to everyone out there for not making videos for a very, very long while. Unfortunately, work, children, family, studying does take up a lot of my time, and I find myself sometimes in front of work for hours and hours, so I do apologize for taking so long. However, we're back, and this is what's important. Last couple of videos were about words and roots, and the last one actually was about vowel points and some of the myths about vowel points. And this week I actually want to talk a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls, just a tad, and about vowel consonants. So, one of the things that I commonly teach my students is the difference between spelling of First Temple period and Second Temple period. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls are actually one of our tools to understand this spelling. And then we have the Aleppo Codex, or the Masoretic spelling. Now, First Temple spelling, besides not having any vowel points, which we explained last time, were inserted into the text much later. The spelling itself was usually very, very short as well. For example, Phoenician inscriptions that we have have even shorter spelling, and sometimes when you actually look at it, if you actually put the consonants in front of your eyes, you realize that you can't really read the words that clearly unless you actually have the context of the words. Now, First Temple spelling amongst Israelites was kind of like that, but not exactly. Certain consonants were considered to be of the root, even if we see them today in many cases as vowel consonants, and I'll explain what those are in a moment. We actually see them also as part of the root, and therefore they have to naturally appear, because what they did is they actually did phonetic spelling, which means that if something belongs to the root, you write it, and therefore you also pronounce it. So for example, the word bayit has a yud in it, and because the yud belongs to the root, you actually have to pronounce it. But for example, in Phoenician, the word bayit is actually wrote as but, it's only bet and tav. And we can't really exactly know exactly how they actually pronounce it, but we can get kind of close, more or less, to what they pronounce. There are ways of reconstructing. However, when a consonant is not part of the root, you remove it. This is very common with consonants such as Aleph, Hey, Vav, and Yud. Aleph being a subject by itself, I'll talk about that towards the end, but we have Hey, Vav, and Yud. These consonants actually also carry with them vowel points. Hey can carry an A or an E or even an O. Vav usually carries an O or an U, and Yud usually carries with it an E or an E. The Samaritans, by the way, have their Hey actually also carries the E sound, and this is why the name Moshe that we pronounce as an E at the end, they will pronounce as an E, because that's the tradition they had. And overall, just a note about the Samaritan Hebrew, their Hebrew is basically Second Temple Hebrew being preserved throughout the centuries with some corruptions. But in overall, their Hebrew has elements which are very old and elements which are kind of new. You can't really call them First Temple elements. In any case, Hey, Vav, and Yud tend to be removed from First Temple texts. And therefore, for example, if I take the Hezekiah's inscription, there are places where you need to add the vowel consonant to really have it resemble the way we know it from the Masoretic text and from modern Hebrew. Later on, because of many different reasons, people not knowing exactly how to read, literature becoming more common amongst Jews living in Judea and the Galilee, and in many situations people that didn't really know how to read Hebrew that well, people started adding consonants. And what they did is, in places where there could be different possible readings, you actually add a Hey, a Vav, or a Yud to indicate which one of the vowel points you're supposed to pronounce. This is actually very common with the Dead Sea Scrolls. When you open up a Dead Sea Scroll, and you can go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and actually see the actual Dead Sea Scrolls, except for the Isaiah scroll and other ones that they rotate. The Isaiah scroll they actually have, there's a facsimile. It used to be a facsimile. The original was actually placed there, but they had to remove it, and these days you just see an image of a facsimile. But when you go through it, you can actually see some of the differences between the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scroll, and it's called the Great Isaiah Scroll, by the way. But you can see the places where they add like Vav and Yud to indicate which one of the vowel points you're supposed to pronounce. Besides that, there were also some unique pronunciations that they had at the time, which meant that, for example, pronominal suffixes, for those who know what these are, were pronounced a little differently, excuse me, from what we actually have in the Masoretic text, and these are more dialect issues. So, quite commonly what happens is when you look at Dead Sea Scrolls, you look at the Aleppo Codex, there are places where you have these extra consonants, and places where you do not have these extra consonants. And the reason is probably because the Masoretes had different scrolls in front of them. The Dead Sea Scrolls represent a very specific tradition of writing and spelling, and some of the scrolls are considered to be what's called vulgar scrolls, which had not only different spelling, but also cases where it's obvious someone changed some of the words to make it more common so people actually understand what they're reading. It's more like, for example, your own version where you write in your own Bible notes to explain things to yourself. But in the synagogue, you open up a Torah scroll, there are no notes. You won't find any notes. What you have is the actual given text. So when people make the claim that the Masoretes changed the text, and I'm continuing some of the line that we have from the previous video, when people make the claim that the Masoretes changed the text, they're actually ignoring something much more complex. That the Masoretes, what they did is they actually preserved many things in the text, and one of the next videos is actually going to be about places where we can see the Masoretes preserve things. But the main point is that the Masoretes probably had in front of them different versions, and some versions had more vowel consonants, some versions had less vowel consonants. And what they had to do is to decide which one is the best one. Unfortunately, the work of the Masoretes is slightly unknown to us. There are things that they did that we don't necessarily know the exact process of how they made certain decisions, but there are places where we can make a clear understanding that their decision is based on a need to interpret things correctly, or to interpret things based on how they understood, or the traditional understanding of the text was. So what we're basically left with is, when we look at the Aleppo Codex, which is the main text that most Bible scholars would use, we actually have places where we have similarities to the Dead Sea Scrolls and places where we have a difference. And those differences actually come from the fact that some of the spelling used by the Dead Sea Scrolls are enhanced spellings where you add vowel consonants to make it easier for the reader to read. So this raises a question regarding the importance of keeping a text exactly as is. And it also raises the question, were the Dead Sea Scrolls actually official scrolls, or were these considered to be non-official scrolls? Some people claim that the Dead Sea Scrolls were not written in Qumran, which is actually quite a reasonable argument, and some of these scrolls actually might have come from Jerusalem. Some people think that this was the Library of Jerusalem. It's not too clear, and this is why it's very difficult to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls are authoritative. This is a major question inside this field of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Where did they actually come from? But whatever the case may be, we have examples where we can see maybe a flexibility in certain elements of spelling, that if we need someone to be able to read the text correctly, we can add consonants as long as we're not changing the meaning of the word. This is also, by the way, quite a common thing with reading of the text. If, for example, if someone misreads in the synagogue, but the context and the understanding is still the same, and they have not fundamentally changed anything in the text, we're perfectly fine. You don't always have to go back and reread the text when it's read in the synagogue. However, a lot of people have come up with this idea that Masoretes changed something, and I think that's more of a trying to avoid Jewish or Judaic way of doing things and trying to kind of present things as more original. But none of these arguments really stand, because there's a lot that we actually don't know. So all of it falls in the area of speculation. But in any case, what we basically have is, we're just recapping on everything that we said. We have Hey, Vav, and Yud. They were added into Second Temple spelling to make it easier to read. And then what happened, Masoretes had to remove some of them, probably because of other parallel traditions that existed. Aleph, and I said I'll mention at the end, Aleph can be a vowel consonant, but Aleph is also a unique consonant because it was preserved. In many situations, when a consonant goes silent, it also drops. Here, the Aleph was preserved, and the Aleph can also be of the root. And this is why, for example, the word chatat has an Aleph there, but the Aleph is actually not really pronounced. I don't say chata'at. However, in Jerusalem, a lot of the old Jerusalemites actually say, and for example, the number matayim, which is 200, they say ma'atayim. So it's actually quite possible that there was a reading tradition we pronounced even the Aleph. But the Aleph can also carry with it certain vowel points, most commonly an ah sound sometimes. Aleph is really the parallel of hey in Aramaic, and it carries the same way a hey at the end of a word carries an ah, or an eh, the Aramaic would end a word with an Aleph, and it does the same thing. So this is a quick video about vowel consonants. They actually have a name in Latin which I can't stand. I actually do not like the terms they use in Latin, especially the Gesenius terms. A lot of teachers teach this. I just think avoid it. It's this confusing Latin terms. It's the same issue they had with medicine, where medical students had to memorize a lot of very confusing words, and it was just horrible for them. And from what I hear, they've actually started changing that. And I think the same thing has to be done with Hebrew as well, and other fields as well. Because it's very confusing when you open up a book, and if you're not versed in Latin, or specifically Gesenius, which is what we call classic studies, then you won't be able to understand what you're reading. And Gesenius lived in the 1700s. We're already in 2015, 2016, and a lot of it has actually been advanced in this material. So really we can just drop some of these terms and just go to other terms which anyhow might actually define some of the concepts in Hebrew, and especially biblical Hebrew, in a much better way, because since the 1980s and 1990s, a lot has changed, and they started realizing that a lot of the classic way of understanding the biblical text and understanding terminology is actually wrong. So anyhow, thank you for watching this video. You can also go to my website, which is below on the description. There are more videos there. There are also recordings of the weekly portion, recordings that I've done on other subjects. And also you can go to my Facebook, which is also in the description. And next time, another video, hopefully with not such a long break in between. I'm pushing myself to make more videos, and hopefully it will benefit everyone. Thank you.